Please subscribe to our channel, Pacific Front Untold, and be sure to leave a comment after watching a video. The International Zone, an often forgotten neutral district that existed in the city of Shanghai, played a unique role during the battle for that city, which lasted from August 13th to November 26, 1937. It became a multinational refuge for foreigners and many Chinese who were fleeing other cities and towns in the region that were ravaged by warfare. While intense fighting lasted months throughout the rest of the city, daily life went on inside the International Zone, though it was not without challenges. The origin of the International Zone dates back to the end of the Opium Wars, which were fought between 1839 to 1860. As a result of these wars, China was open to the rest of the world once more. During the Asia-Pacific War, also known as the Pacific Theater of World War II, the international community attempted to provide aid to those who sought shelter in the International Zone. Austrian Jews were among the groups that saw the International Zone as a safe haven to escape Nazi Germany. They settled in the Hangzhou section of the International Zone after the end of the Battle of Shanghai. This section would eventually become known as the Shanghai Ghetto and Little Vienna as a result. Close to 500,000 Chinese citizens would also find their way to the International Zone during the course of the Battle of Shanghai. The intense fighting and chaos devastated the city and disrupted the sense of normalcy among those living there. The Battle of Shanghai began on August 13, 1937, and is considered as the first major battle of the Asia-Pacific War. The battle raged from the core of the city to its very outskirts and saw everything from intense urban fighting and trench warfare to naval and air combat until its eventual takeover by Imperial Japan in 1941. Life was extremely difficult within the zone, especially due to overcrowding and the conflicts that caused within the settlement. Many Chinese citizens were already living in the International Zone under the municipal council before the battle began, and the number of settlers grew steeply after the outbreak of fighting. The total civilian population of Shanghai reached approximately 3.2 million people between 1925 and 1937, making Shanghai one of the largest cities in the world prior to World War II. Of this, the International Zone held more than 1 million civilians. The Bund was a significant part of the International Zone's infrastructure. It was the home of lavish hotels, custom ports, gardens, and the Shanghai waterfront. Chinese and foreign shops also existed in the International Zone, in addition to restaurants that provided meals of varying kinds of cuisines. Recreational parks and racetracks provided leisure outlets where Western businessmen who owned stables bet on pony races. A large portion of the population within the broader city of Shanghai depended on the flourishing economic activity and infrastructure inside the International Zone. Life in the International Zone during the war was marked by consistent shortages of basic necessities, crowded living quarters with, at times, 30 people living to a space, and difficulties in inter-community communication due to language and cultural barriers. Many immigrants who arrived in the International Zone did not speak any of the Chinese dialects, nor did they speak English. The famous Sassoon and Kadoorie families were among the immigrants that lived in the International Zone. The Sassoons, a prominent Jewish family, arrived in Shanghai after fleeing persecution in Iraq in 1829. The Sassoons' businesses at one point spanned throughout the entire continent of Asia in the 18th century, and they built a presence in the city that is still notable today. The Sassoon family once owned the Cathay Hotel, now called the Peace Hotel, on the Bund. There they built a business dynasty that also included profiting from the opium trade. The Kadoorie family were also of Iraqi Jewish origin and fled due to persecution. They built their own business empire in Shanghai, eventually rivaling that of the Sassoon family, primarily through investing and dealing in rubber while also dabbling in the growing auto industry. Both families are credited with saving nearly 18,000 Jews during the Holocaust. The Sassoon and Kadoorie families, along with Ho Feng Shan, the Chinese diplomat in Vienna at the time, were responsible for the survival of a significant portion of Austrian Jewish communities. The experiences of the Sassoons and Kaduris are just two examples of the diverse experiences of ethnic minorities in Shanghai who relied on the city as a safe haven before, during, and after World War II. For many, Shanghai was one of the last places to serve as a refuge, since the city did not require refugees or migrants to carry extensive travel papers during wartime. This made Shanghai a sanctuary city for many refugees and minorities fleeing persecution. The population increase during and after the Battle of Shanghai put a strain on the already scarce resources within the city. International aid was difficult to obtain both during the months-long battle and afterwards. While Shanghai was not as depleted in resources like many other regions conquered by Imperial Japan in the outer zone, including Burma, Siam, Indochina, and Malaya, international aid and resources, including food and basic necessities, were difficult to come by due to the battle. During the battle for Shanghai, the Nationalist Army, led by Chiang Kai-shek, was deployed to take and defend Shanghai, but their small and inexperienced air force was outnumbered and outmaneuvered by Imperial Japanese forces, leading to an incident known as Bloody Saturday in the international zone. A bomb dropped by Nationalist Army planes missed a Japanese light cruiser stationed in the port city. Instead of hitting its intended target, the bomb landed on a street near the site of the Palace Hotel, which was filled with civilians. Many rushed out of other nearby hotels in an attempt to help those wounded in the bombing. The impact of the first two bombs that hit the Palace and Cathay hotels was absorbed by the buildings, but the combined impact of all three bombs caused over 1,000 casualties with an additional 830 wounded. The Palace Hotel was an iconic site on the Bund, along with the Cathay Hotel, the latter hosting many famous guests, including Chiang Kai-shek, who later became the leader of the Nationalist Army. The damage to the two hotels and the effects of the bombing caused the British to worry about Shanghai becoming an additional theater of war and led to the implementation of a curfew for civilians inside the international zone. International zone civilians tried to be as discreet as possible in their movements to survive. This included turning out lights, closing window curtains, and staying indoors from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. Despite these rules, civilians of Shanghai's diverse ethnic minorities continued to partake in celebrations or rituals to help build community morale during wartime and collaborated with other citizens to ensure all international zone inhabitants had access to essential resources. Newspapers and radio stations in a variety of languages that covered different topics were a fixture in the international zone. Many hotels in Shanghai also provided places to entertain guests and provided spaces for cultural exchanges despite the wartime restrictions. While the international zone initially came into being as a result of concessions to Western powers, citizens from those powers, along with many Chinese, found refuge within its borders before, during, and after the Second World War. Although the city struggled through difficult times during the Battle of Shanghai, facing shortages of food, water, and living space, in addition to Imperial Japanese aggression, the civilians there helped to maintain and eventually rebuild Shanghai. The lasting legacy of the Sassoon and Kaduri families, survivors of the Bloody Saturday bombing, civilians in the French concession, and residents of the Seibi, Hongkou, and Yongchupu districts continues to have a strong and vibrant presence in modern Shanghai today.